Hello and welcome to the Wednesday, May 1st edition of the Cluster API Office Hours, a subproject of SIG Cluster Lifecycle. Um, if you have any items that you want to bring up today, please go ahead and add them to the agenda, and also please add yourself to the attendee list on the agenda doc as well. Adding the link to that into the group chat for anybody who's attending live. To start with, the first item on our agenda is around creating a new repository for cluster provider API or cluster API provider IBM Cloud.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So let me share my desktop. All right. Okay, so this is going from IBM, and I'm currently working for open source products for IBM Corporate. And so if we go through the cloud providers from the class API, we can see that we don't have IBM Cloud here. So that's the reason why we want to create this cloud provider. So currently we already have a prototype here, but currently it was hosted in multi-cloud lab, and this repo is created by myself. And currently the prototype for this product has been finished. So you can see that we have a document here so that the end user can just follow the document to create a Kubernetes cluster on IBM Cloud. So we have some tutorial here, and also some diagrams, and it's also including some pictures here. So you can just follow the guidance here, and you will be able to create or delete Kubernetes cluster on IBM Cloud. And after the product was finished, I also sent an email into the Kubernetes steering committee, and I hope that we can provide a repo and move the product from multi-cloud lab into the Kubernetes 6. So I have followed the guidance, such as we have followed the code of conduct, and we also have a license following the Apache license v2. And besides, all the contributors have signed the CNCF CRA here. And we also have created a owner file, and in this file we have included all the owners for cluster API, and including the cluster lifecycle, the IBM clouds. So we have all the owners here. And yeah, so this is a email that I sent to Kubernetes steering committee, and besides, I also add the group of Kubernetes 6 cluster lifecycle here. So you can just check the email there. And besides, I also opened a ticket in cluster API, and I got some comments from Jason, I think. So actually, so I'm just wondering how we can move forward for this to create a new repo to host the IBM Cloud provider for cluster API. And besides, I also got a notification from Nikita here, and based on his comments, and he can help me to create the repo of cluster API IBM Cloud provider, but I need to get the approval from the C cluster lifecycle here. So I hope that I can get some comments from you guys to see if we can approve this product and to add it into the Kubernetes 6.
Yeah, so I think there's a few different overlapping concerns here. One of them is to get a repo hosted in the org. You don't necessarily have to get approval from SIG Cluster Lifecycle. The sponsorship from SIG IBM Cloud should be sufficient for that. So you should just be able to show that there was a lazy consensus vote taken within SIG IBM Cloud to adopt the project, and that should be enough to transfer it over. If you would like to wait until that repo is transferred over to add it to the README, then you can do that, but you don't necessarily have to. If you want to create a pull request to link in the IBM provider, you can do that now as well if you want to.
Yes, and so actually I have a question. So how do I create a repo under Kubernetes 6? Because I don't have the permission to create a new repo there.
Yep. So what would happen is you would have to follow up on the steering committee email thread and show them that the adoption of the project from SIG IBM Cloud is good, and then somebody it would just be creating an issue on that Kubernetes org repo to have the repository created.
Great. Jason, so you mean that I can just follow the guidance provided by Nita here? So I can just open a ticket in Kubernetes orgs and then append the approval from SIG IBM Cloud, and then someone will help me to create the repo?
Yep, that's correct.
Oh, okay. Great. Thank you.
Yep, and thanks for covering the provider as well. It's great to see additional providers get added.
Cool. Great. Thank you, Jason.
Yep.
I'm done, I think.
All right, thanks. Does anybody have any questions about the IBM provider before moving on? All right. In that case, next item on the agenda is around the cluster API conformance tests.
Yeah, so that was me. I'm new in the community and was looking for some places to possibly contribute. And I was seeing conformance tests and thinking that might be a good way to both get more test coverage and kind of explore some of the providers and how they're working and get more of a baseline. But I found that one issue, but it seemed like there were a few open questions. So I was kind of curious if there's been previous stuff communicated and just try to get more information and if there's next steps that I can help with.
Yeah, so we're currently in the process of defining out what Cluster API v1 Alpha 2 and beyond is going to look like. And I expect that a lot of the conformance work is probably going to be blocked on that, truthfully. I think there is definitely some end-to-end test work and things like that that can be done both on the Cluster API side and the provider side. But what actual conformance testing will look like will probably be highly dependent on the output of the work streams that are currently defined for.
Jason, if I can jump in there, I'm pretty involved in the conformance effort. And one of the things about conformance in particular is something like Cluster API is not likely to be subject to conformance anytime soon, if ever. So it's conformance is only non-optional GA features. So where conformance could relate really well to this would be the ability to run conformance tests against clusters created with different providers, but that's really kind of outside of the scope, I would think, of this particular effort.
So if I understand the issue correctly that Danny was referencing, it's around creating conformance tests for Cluster API in particular. So if you
go ahead.
So if you have a provider, you can have some type of validation that is conformant with the Cluster API project.
Yeah, I think this is a general problem with conformance. People are using the word conformance and I think we need to switch to the word validation for that sort of thing. So like with Windows, we want a validation suite. With Cluster API, with different levels of features, we may have validation suites. But conformance itself is very special because it actually confers the ability to use the name Kubernetes. Like it's got a lot of sort of significance around it, as opposed to this particular feature works. This set of features is required for a distribution to even be able to use the name. So like it's maybe pedantic, but we need to probably use the word validation here, and then at that point we can do whatever we want and define those validation suites. But like you said, Jason, that's going to depend on what we actually
Thank you. So thank you for that definition, because when people were talking about conformance, I was going to what you were saying with that is a special meaning, and I'm piping up to simply say the easiest way to think about conformance to me, and maybe others do this. Remember those Intel Inside stickers that used to come on computers? Conformance connotes Kubernetes Inside. If you're conformant, you can put a sticker on your distribution that says Kubernetes Inside. It's officially conformant Kubernetes. So the things that CAPI providers deploy could be conformant, but yeah, validation is probably a better phrase.
So I think there's a distinction here too. And I think one of the things we're trying to define is maybe we call it something other than conformance, but similar to Kubernetes conformance, but for cluster API. So if you have a provider or a managed service or something along those lines that says that they are cluster API, they would have to pass this test to be able to.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And we can just for the sake of communication with the broader community, use the word validation. We'll be better off and cause less confusion.
I thought if it said cluster API conformance more specifically, that would just answer that problem, doesn't it? I mean,
But also, doesn't that kind of what is conformant cluster API? If it can deploy the clusters, I mean it's the result that we care about more. Maybe I'm wrong, but I understand the distinction. But conformance is a loaded term when it comes to testing in Kubernetes, and I don't think that your effort at the distinction is going to have the effect that you think it is when you get into conversations with people steeped already in general conformance testing.
Yeah, I agree.
So it sounds like there's some discussion to be had on the naming side of this at least, and then you mentioned there's probably more work that can happen after Alpha 2. Are we at the point where kind of most of the setup for implementing the actual tests is already there and available? And then once we know those concrete APIs, we can then write the tests for it? I'm just wondering if there's any kind of initial work that we can do in advance up front now or any of that.
Yeah, that's a very good question because we have a lot of balls in the air with respect to the V1 Alpha 2 and beyond work right now. One of them is obviously changing up the data model for the project, which would very much impact what kind of this validation suite or whatever we'll call it looks like as far as API types that are consumed and exported. The other one's around the extension mechanism. So how is the provider exposing access to itself? That would be another part of this validation. So until we know what that extension mechanism is, it's going to be a little bit difficult. And then the other parts are around node lifecycle management and control plane lifecycle management. And without having some more concreteness around what those are, it's tough to really say what that validation should look like. So I would expect that over the course of probably in the next few weeks, we should start seeing more concreteness around what those proposals are going to be shaped up for. And then at that point is probably when we can start talking about what validation looks like.
Just a brief thought, actually. Maybe one thing that would be helpful at this point, while we talk about potentially a new API and a data model, and there could be all sorts of repercussions based on that. Would it be of interest to kind of define an abstract provider that the test could be written for that could serve as a model for future providers?
So we already have kind of an entry sample provider that's based on Kubernetes and Docker kind. And I would expect that, one, that allows us to do kind of more generic end-to-end testing in the cluster API project itself. But I would expect that could also serve potentially as an example in addition to updating the docs that we already have.
So related to this, we have the current Git book has instructions to create a new provider. There are portions where the code is in the book instead of the book referencing code. I think it would be useful to have an example provider that was self-contained so that the Git book could reference it. It could be built and tested independently. And that might satisfy the question you asked, Ilya.
Yeah, and perhaps, I was actually thinking of a kind of provider that would be quite inexpensive to run, like a mock provider of sorts that wouldn't actually start any VMs or containers or whatnot. That wouldn't necessarily depend on Linux per se. You know, just a kind of a mock provider that one could run anywhere.
And that was kind of the goal behind the kind-based example provider, was, you know, it can specifically run in a Prow job, which was a limitation for all the other providers, you know, some of the other providers that we had.
Yeah, but that's containers. That sort of, you know, is not. It can be expensive to run.
So if you're going to go on the basis or the foundational concept that you need Kubernetes to run these providers, and I've kind of been doing some work that you don't, but if I think that's kind of the accepted idea, right? So if you're going to have to run Kubernetes to do that, I mean, how are you running that?
Yeah, I think you're right. It's a goal.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a goal that this needs to be able, Flutter API should be able to be deployed in Kubernetes. And I think the kind and creating containers is a relatively cheap way to do that. There may be cheaper ways.
Well, there are like, you know, like there are those, what do you call it, shallow node things that you could run, and you can sort of pretend like you have some nodes, and that kind of stuff already exists in Kubernetes itself. And there are various other things. I don't know. I mean, I just, what I'm thinking here is that it would help us to have some kind of way to validate, to sort of, to have a better API. It would help to have some kind of tests that are designed to be purely about the API, and they don't really have side effects as such. I mean, that's the kind of thinking that led me to this suggestion. And
are those more unit than end to end?
Yeah, sort of. I mean, the back end of it would be more like a unit test. Yeah. I mean,
so I see what you're saying. Sort of mocking parts of the controller framework or parts of the actuators. My only problem is that once you start doing that, I think you're putting so much effort. And I was looking at that too recently, and I ended up just saying at the point that I'm going to care about using these independently are the actuators, because beyond that, you have to mock so much of what Kubernetes provides. Just you should use kind and run Kubernetes. But I mean, I hear you. I definitely see the value in something quick like that.
That's something that may, just as an idea, I mean, that may help development of the spec per se. If the spec had tests to it, that's where I'm coming from. But then again, yeah, can move on to another topic. As in things to think about, right?
Anything else on that topic before we move on?
I think that's it. Continue to track the Alpha 2. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, next up is the work stream updates. Well, actually, do we have any other topics before we get into the work stream updates? No. All right, Vince, you're up first with the data model.
All right, so data model, the proposal is shaping up a little bit more. We added some like YAML and just like to kind of like start reasoning about like what the types will look like and how the relationship between them is going to be from a user perspective. A reminder that we're trying to build types, they don't have to be simple. We're not trying to build an opinionated tool, but we're trying to build composable objects that can create powerful Kubernetes clusters. So if you do have time, please do go in the document and like leave comments or add new content. We're trying to kind of like get this up and running in the next few weeks and then proceed with a PR, which is going to be kind of like the starting of like the new data types and how they're going to be defined. And there is also like some new data types that have been added, kind of like related to the extension mechanism, which will be filled in once the extension mechanism is kind of has its own proposal. That's all for me.
All right. Chuck, extension mechanism?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So we've been having some good discussion on the Discuss Kubernetes site. It would be great to have more people following along there. And then as far as the proposal doc goes, I restructured it just a little bit to sort of frame the problem and sort of what exists now and what we are thinking of moving to and the pros and cons of each of those. So if you want to take a look at that, there's a couple of changes there and some more information filled out. We've been getting some good participation, but more is always better.
All right, thank you, Chuck. I see, Nadir, you put yourself down for the update for Node Lifecycle.
Yeah, we had a meeting last week, and so we decided to split up into two KEPs to start off with. One is on image stamping, so image stamping in the sense of building things like AMIs and VMDKs and QCal images and those kind of things. We have a draft KEP in which you can put your comments. I've also started a discuss thread if you want to have longer discussions about things outside of the Google Docs comment thread format. Also started, we've got a blank template to fill in for Node Lifecycle Hook. So what kind of, in terms of thinking about the extension mechanisms, which parts of the Node lifecycle are we going to make extensible? So we'll need user stories for those and to start thinking about how to make that work. So Tim's going to be trying to get the KEPs into shape for next week.
All right, thanks for the update, Nadir. Is Hardik on for the control plane lifecycle?
Yes, so we are still in the process of preparing the proposal docs for 3 approaches that we discussed last time. One of the approaches how to handle the control plane, which is like a pod-based control plane, which is running on a management cluster itself. And there were 2 more approaches that we had discussed. One of them was specifically the dedicated master machines, running the control plane on the dedicated master machines, and one was around manage Kubernetes clusters. So we'll try to release the proposal sooner, but the next meeting is set Tuesday next week. I just sent the invitation. So yeah, it would be nice to have more folks there this time. And that's it.
All right, thanks, Hardik. Any other topics before we adjourn for the day?
I think we forgot on data model to talk about the next meeting for that work stream. It was on the agenda, but I don't think we talked about that.
Yeah, I was going to just send an invite for like at the same time that we had the last meeting for next week.
Thanks, Vince.
Thank you.
Anything else?
I guess I have one general question. Are we setting some time boundaries? I know that for, I guess, Node Lifecycle, we're trying to, you know, get the KEPs wrapped up. Do we have any time boundaries in place that we, in general? Do we want some if we don't?
Yeah, maybe we should try and get the for Node Lifecycle. Maybe if we can get the user stories done this week, that'd be great. I think.
Yeah, that's on my plate.
I was going to say, in general, we haven't set anything broadly, but I do think that having milestones and rough deadlines would be a good thing to do. So like if one of them is setting up user stories and we have a deadline for that, and then getting a proposal written, I don't know what the appropriate times could be given everyone's availability, but I do agree that trying to set some deadlines would be useful. So maybe at the next meeting for each work stream, they could individually try and come up with those deadlines.
That sounds good. And I suppose for the extension mechanism that's been progressing mostly over Discuss, that Discuss could be used for setting that deadline as well.
Yep.
Sounds good to me as well.
Anything else? All right. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Take care.
Thank you.